Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. We are going to come back to Benjamin Brown. He is somebody that had a visitation from two of the three Nephites. We found his story in this book called Gems for Young Folks. And just a little bit more about this. This book is part of a 17-book series. And from what I can tell, these books are just full of these types of stories, miracles, visions, visitations, dreams, and stuff like that of early church members. So I'm going to comb through this. I wanted to find out a little bit more about it. It was produced by Juvenile Instructor, and I just found out that this is a magazine that originally was a private publication of the Cannon family. And George Q. Cannon, who later became a member of the first presidency, he was the first editor. So their family compiled all these different stories as a private project, which makes me want to continue doing what I'm doing. I've noticed all these different groups doing similar things. There's me with my spreadsheets. You have places like Scripture Central, Fair Latter-day Saint, and many, many others that have tried to compile all this information about the church, whether it's stories or journals or putting together timelines. And it's just a thing that people do, and it needs to be done. I hope that maybe you'll do it if you feel prompted. But in my case, I'm trying to put all these visions, visitations, and stuff of general authorities and people that they know in timeline order. So I've got to go through all these. And by the way, this ended up becoming a church publication, and it was essentially a forerunner of The Friend and For Strength of Youth, essentially. So that's why I trust these stories. They have to come from kind of an authoritative place. That's why I'm saying this. Okay, so before I read you this new account, I just want to remind you, or tell you for the first time if you didn't see that video, that what happened in this story is Benjamin Brown had been reading the Bible, and he saw the different gifts of the Spirit, like speaking in tongues, and he knew that that had to be present in the true church. And so he had a moment where he was trying to find a church to join, and to his dismay, one of the ones that he went to was like, no, you need to put that away. That kind of stuff is of the devil, and you shouldn't be thinking about those things. And then he came across our church. He went to one of our meetings, and there were, elders of the church that were there, and they spoke in tongues. And Benjamin Brown had the gift of tongues, and he could understand it. But he's like, well, but, I have the gift of tongues too. That doesn't mean that you're the true church. But he read the Book of Mormon, and he read about the three Nephites, and he prayed to have a visit from the three Nephites. It turned out that only two of them were able to show up for his request, but I guess that's better than none. And they spoke to him in the language that was being spoken when he went to that first meeting that he attended with our church. It was the Nephite language, and he understood it. And they told him, you shouldn't have treated that so lightly, like it was no big thing. But now you have this witness. And if you were to turn back on this church at this point, there's no helping you. You've received an incredible witness. You basically have a knowledge at this point. So the punishment would be pretty severe if you were to go back on everything that you know now. So that's just a quick recap. I always like to try and go to your original sources. I did a little bit more digging, and Doctrine and Covenants Central pointed out this book, Testimonies for the Truth, Liverpool, Autobiography of Benjamin Brown. So I searched for that. They have it in the church history catalog, but it doesn't look like it's available online, or if it is, you have to request it. But thankfully, the book is on archive.org. So we're going to read from archive.org. Okay. What I'm about to read to you is going to be a number of different things. And I'm gonna have to separate these out after this video and put them on my spreadsheet. I have a spreadsheet, the one that we were just looking at, quotes, visions, and visitations. Um, it's a timeline of all these things. At the bottom, I have like a tally of the number of accounts that I have by decade. So, but I'm doing this video late. Uh, I spent most of the day at Autobiography today. You can go to my other channel called Explore Church Sites and see the video that I made there. But I usually like to do this stuff before I create the video, but I'll have to do it after. Okay, so this is chapter 2. He says, I was not baptized directly, as I hope to have the pleasure of seeing my wife comply with the same ordinance when we could enter the church together. In the meantime, I prosecuted my inquiries. Shortly after inquiring of the Lord concerning the truth of the judgments preached by the Latter-day Saints as being at hand and impending over this generation, I was shown in answer by a vision the various scenes described in the revelations of the ancient prophets. The inhabitants of the earth appeared before me in their various occupations, plowing, sowing, fishing, and engaging in mechanical business. I saw them under the infliction of the plagues, etc., lift their eyes towards heaven, curse God, and die. I also saw many other things as predicted by ancient prophets. Thus do I know, and that's in italics, thus do I know the truth of the Bible as well as of the Book of Mormon, and I'm a witness for both. So that's interesting. I wish he would have elaborated on what else he saw, but he mentions plagues, plural, and men lifting their eyes toward heaven, cursing God, and wishing that they could die. Let me know what you think. Do you feel like we've seen this yet? I feel like we have. There are so many people that, basically despise themselves, and they hate God, and they hate life, and they hate everybody. And I might have to do a video about this sometime, because I'll bet I could put together something to show that we are seeing this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, continuing. A whole year and a half, I deferred my baptism, still waiting for my wife, who, although at first favorable to Mormonism, had become a determined enemy to the church. When I went to hear the quote-unquote Mormons preach at Westfield, a village where the 12 apostles were holding their first conference, curiosity had drawn great numbers to hear them, so that they had crowded meetings all the time. The second day of this conference, I, with 4 others, was baptized by Elder McClellan. By the way, if this is William McClellan, I did a video on my other channel called Explore Church Sites where I went to his gravesite, which is here in Independence, Missouri. So that'd be interesting if it's the same one. He ended up apostatizing. He ended up becoming one of the 12 apostles, if it's the same guy. But anyway, and confirmed the same night. While undressing on the bank of the creek, preparing for the ordinance, Satan made a last effort to prevent my entering the church. Now this part right here, this is a little mysterious. I don't know if this was like, Satan himself or one of his followers, or just somebody in mortality that was under the influence of the adversary. So I'm not sure if I'm going to add this to my timeline, but he says, a man coming along by the waterside came up to me and said, I wish to speak to you for a few minutes before you go into the water. Thinking, of course, that he was a friend or a member of the church who intended to give me some instruction as to my behavior when in the water, I listened to him, and having got me to retire some rods off, he said, have you heard what has come out? No, I replied. What about? Why, he continued, concerning the Mormons, it has been discovered that it is all an imposture, a regular hoax to deceive the people. The affair has just come to light. If you wait only a little, you'll hear all about it. At first, this completely stunned me, for I was listening very attentively, considering him one of the church, and for a moment I began to question, but quickly recollecting the manifestations I had received, I told him he was a child of the devil. Good job. And pushed past him to the water and was baptized at once. This was on the 15th of May, 1837. Oh, so the Saints were still in Missouri at this time. I don't think that he was, based on the rest of what he says. But this would have been about the like the far west period in Missouri. Let's stop right here. So let me know what you think about this. Do you read this, that this person that appeared, was it just a flesh and blood man that was evil under the influence of Satan? Or do you think that this was like a manifestation? I wouldn't be surprised either way. Now, we all know that there are people that seem to be members of the church, and maybe they technically are. But we have to be really careful with who we listen to, you guys, especially here on YouTube and social media, because there are people that say that they are members of the church. But if you have any sense about you, if you're familiar with the church at all, you should be able to easily detect when something is off. When somebody is going against church leadership, trying to erode your confidence in the church, the organization, church leadership, whatever. You guys, we got to be careful. There are wolves in sheep's clothing. You have people that are openly against the church and they're not members of the church, or maybe they once were, but now they're not. But then you have another category of people that are still in the church and act like they're members of the church, but they're under the influence of Satan. I wouldn't be surprised if Satan has different agents that he works through that are in the church. And when I say the church, I'm not talking about leadership. I'm talking about just regular members that moan and groan and complain and introduce their own doctrine and interpretation of scripture. And I feel like one of the key signs is that they're against the leadership of the church and they try and reinterpret things. Share your thoughts in the comments below about that. Okay, continuing. My wife, who had managed to be present when I was going to the water, and even threatened that she would not live with me, was for a long while after, perhaps a year and a half, bitterly opposed to the work. But I knew from the Lord that she would come into the church, and I told her so. As the way she was at last brought in was very curious, I will mention it. She dreamed one night that a large company of visitors had come to her house, for whom she had to prepare supper. On going into her buttery, to procure the necessary food to cook, I guess that's supposed to be like the pantry, she could only find a small potato, about the size of a robin's egg. I don't know how big robin's eggs are, but that's probably not very big. Lying on a wooden trencher. However, with this small stock, she commenced, and by some wonderful means converted this little affair into a splendid preparation of pies, puddings, etc. When they were ready, she stood still, wondering how it had all been done, for, as may be supposed, it puzzled her sorely to conceive how, from a little potato, and that on a wooden trencher, she had produced such an elegant entertainment. Just at this moment, while she was thus marveling, I was awakened from my sleep with a command sounding in my ears that I was to say to my wife, "Don't you remember hearing that you should not despise the day of small things?" Isn't that interesting? I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have had like similar experiences where you and your spouse have like complementary dreams. Um, I know it's happened with me and Jenica at least a couple times. Where it seemed like there was like kind of like divine guidance in those dreams. But imagine the effect that this had on her, you know, and imagine what it was like living in the early days of the church where, you know, the church was small. It was just beginning. It wasn't well established. Like, you know, like well, I don't know when the Presbyterian church started, but I'm sure it started before this time, or, you know, other churches, you know, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Catholic Church, you know, it must have looked like a small potato about the size of a robin's egg. Okay. Uh, I was to speak at once without waiting. So I awoke her and without any preface, did as I was bid. The wonderful concurrence of these words with her dream and the self-evident interpretation of it, referring as it did to her past conduct for one of the principal reasons of the opposition she felt to my joining the church, was that she considered it disgraced. She considered it disgraced her to have her husband belong to a church that was so poor and everywhere spoken against. So impressed itself upon her mind with other confirmations that she was baptized and has remained firm to the church ever since. When I had been in the church about a year and a half, I was ordained an elder under the hands of Jared Carter. The next day, I, with my wife, went up to Kirtland to visit the saints living there. After a very happy time, during which the Book of Doctrine and Covenants was first presented to the church, we started for home. While on the lakes, I was attacked by one of the lake fevers prevalent there and became very ill indeed. I was, however, taken home and put to bed. The same day, two elders of the church called in to see me, and finding I was in such a condition, they laid their hands upon me. Excuse me. Whilst their hands were yet upon my head, I felt the disease remove from my body, commencing at the pit of my stomach, moving gradually upwards toward the hands of the elders, and I was made perfectly whole. So I'm going to have to add this one to, geez Louise, you see, I can't just like make one video about any one of these stories. It has to be a few together. I'm getting to one in just a minute at the Kirtland Temple that really has me excited to share with you. I should have said that at the beginning of the video. But I have a similar spreadsheet for miracles, and I'm going to have to put this one on there. Okay. The same day, I was out at work milking my cows and went round to invite my neighbors to hear the preaching in the evening. This was the first case of healing I had ever witnessed. Okay, here we go. Here's what I want to, this is what I really want to show you. The succeeding winter, I again went up to Kirtland to attend the dedication of the temple and to meet with the solemn assembly that was there convened. There, the Spirit of the Lord, as on the day of Pentecost, was profusely poured out. Now, he is not exaggerating. You can see that the decade with the most accounts of visions and visitations that I have so far is the 1830s. This is when the Kirtland Temple was dedicated. And on the day that it was dedicated and the days surrounding, there was a whole host of visions and visitations and really, really, really interesting things happening. One of my favorite ones, let's see. Yeah, this was still the same year. We don't know the exact date, but it was after the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. Brigham Young and his, I don't think he was his brother-in-law yet, but his future brother-in-law, Truman O. Angel, the architect of the Salt Lake Temple, they were outside the Kirtland Temple and they looked up on the backside and they were looking through the windows and they saw angels. There were two angels that were like if I remember right, they were like pacing back and forth as though they were sentries or like guards. You know how you watch like Looney Tunes or old things where you have like guards that walk back and forth across a castle wall or something like that. That's how they describe that. And I don't know, but I can just like totally picture that in my mind. Um, I had the opportunity last year to go to the Kirtland Temple. I was there for the eclipse. It was the day after General Conference. For me, it was my own kind of Pentecostal type experience. But I went and looked at those windows, and I just imagine how amazing that would be to like look up, not expecting to see anybody in the temple at that time, but seeing these. And it wasn't only that. I want to say that yeah, we looked up and saw two personages, one before each window, leaving and approaching each other like guards would do. This continued until quite dark. As they were walking back and forth, one turned his face to me. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's a little bit freaky actually. One turned one turned his face to me for an instant, but while they walked to and fro, but a side view was visible. Um Anyway, there was something else I wanted to say, but I guess it wasn't with this account. Okay, so my point is there 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 were a lot of things in connection with the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. A lot of things that happened, like supernatural things. So when he says, "There the Spirit of the Lord, as on the day of Pentecost, was profusely poured out," he is not kidding. He's not kidding. Hundreds of elders spoke in tongues, but many of them being young in the church and never having witnessed the manifestation of this gift before, felt, can you believe this? They felt a little alarmed. You guys, I've never experienced the gift of tongues in the way that he's talking about it. We do know that there's the gift of tongues when it comes to missionary work. You go to a foreign speaking mission and you can feel the Spirit with you, helping you speak that language. But it seems that there are different layers to the gift of tongues. Everything from, what I just said, to just like completely and fluently speaking another language, to not even knowing that language at all and speaking it fluently. And then beyond that, speaking a language that isn't even alive anymore, like Nephite, and speaking that. So I'm guessing that they're in one of these later categories, and therefore were a little bit alarmed when they started speaking another language. This caused the prophet Joseph Smith to pray the Lord to withhold the Spirit. So this is really interesting. This is a little detail that I haven't come across so far. It's like the signs in the power that was coming through was so strong that the prophet had to be like, okay, hold on. Can we please back this up just a little bit? We need to tone it down. People are getting scared. They're starting to speak other languages. So let's please turn it down a notch. That must have been a pretty intense experience. I wish that I could have been there to witness it. Maybe we did. Maybe, in the premortal life, we got to see that play out. But, yeah, hundreds of elders spoke in tongues, hundreds, but many of them being young in the church and never having witnessed the manifestation of this gift before, felt a little alarmed. This caused the prophet Joseph Smith to pray the Lord to withhold the Spirit. So interesting. Joseph then instructed them on the nature of the gift of tongues and the operation of the Spirit generally. Now, on my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z, this is currently row 554 for speaking in tongues. I don't know if this was at the Kirtland Temple or if this was afterwards, but this is Journal of Discourses, Volume 6, page 240. And in this quote, he talks about the visitation of angels, but also how you have to be careful because Satan can appear as well, and you can't just like believe everything that comes to you. There, you need to like do certain things. You can pause and read this if you like, but he talks about the gift of tongues. So it's in this second paragraph. Every spirit or vision or singing is not of God. The devil is an orator. He is powerful. He took our Savior onto a pinnacle of the temple and kept him in the wilderness for 40 days. The gift of discerning spirits will be given to the presiding elder. Keep that in mind. For people that tell you that, the president of the church has gone astray or the watchmen on the tower are not doing their job, they have the gift of discerning spirits. They know. And they also have priesthood keys, right? They have the priesthood keys that were given in the Kirtland Temple, like the Gathering of Israel. There's been a number of characters out there who have claimed that they're gathering Israel or that what the church is doing is only a small part. No, the church is directing the gathering of Israel, both scattered Israel across the world, as well as the gathering of the Jews. That happened all the way back, starting with the dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple. That's the first time that it was said that from this very hour that the Jews would start to assemble in Jerusalem. It's in Doctrine and Covenants section 109. And then Orson Hyde, one of the apostles, was sent to Jerusalem physically in 1841 to dedicate the land. And after him, there were several others. There's probably like something like 5 or 6 other times that apostles went to Jerusalem and dedicated the land for the gathering. All the gathering is done under the authority of the priesthood keys restored through Moses to Joseph Smith. And those keys are held by all 15 apostles. They all have all the keys, but only the president of the church is the one that can exercise all those keys. Okay? So let's not get confused about these things. Okay, continuing. I'm just going to skip to here. Speak not in the gift of tongues without understanding it. So this is probably what Benjamin Brown is talking about, that Joseph Smith gave instruction as to the gift of speaking in tongues. Speak not in the gift of tongues without understanding it or without interpretation. So this is key. He says, the devil can speak in tongues. The adversary will come with his work. He can tempt all classes, can speak in English or Dutch. Let no one speak in tongues unless he interpret, except by the consent of the one who is placed to preside. Then he may discern or interpret, or another may. So there's an order in the church. And usually apostate people like to go against church leadership or say that they're the ones that have the gift or the keys or the power or whatever. Okay, so going back to this, Joseph then instructed them on the nature of the gift of tongues and the operation of the Spirit generally. We had a most glorious and never to be forgotten time. Angels were seen by numbers present, and the first endowments were received, which it was really kind of just like the first like washings and anointings, like basically initiatory type stuff. It was the introduction of the endowment, essentially. It was during this assembly that the saints' favorite hymn was given by inspiration, commencing, "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning. The latter-day glory begins to come forth. The visions and blessings of old are returning. The angels are coming to visit the earth." Yeah, that was definitely happening at the Kirtland Temple on this occasion. The beauty and applicability of this hymn will be seen by the saints on reading the third and fourth verses, when it is recollected that this was a solemn assembly, in that the ordinance of washing of feet, etc., was just then being attended to. It was also at this time, which really it was I think it was like a week later. I can't remember. Um, oops. Anyway, it wasn't during the dedication, but it was also at this time that Elijah the prophet appeared and conferred upon Joseph the keys of turning the hearts of the fathers to the children, previous to the reinstitution of the ordinance of baptism for the dead. By this time, most of the members of the Pomfret branch, into which I had been baptized, were gathered up to Kirtland, the first gathering place of the saints. And I was left without any one to counsel or direct me as to the way in which I should devote my labors in spreading the principles of truth, when one day the word of the Lord, by the power of the Spirit, came unto me, saying, I have 14 sheep in Portland. Go and gather them. Then go south where I have 22 more and gather them also. I then began to preach for the first time, and for that purpose procured the schoolroom in Portland, and through my friends circulated a notice that I was going to preach. This gathered a small congregation of some 30 or 40 people. At the time appointed, I stood up to address them. As soon as I rose to my feet and looked on the congregation, the dream which I had 5 years before, but which I had entirely forgotten, flashed across my recollection. There was the identical room I had seen, with the very people and children just in those positions in that place that I had described to them, that I had described them to my wife years before, when I informed her that I dreamed I was called to preach the gospel. This was summertime. I continued preaching at Portland until the winter came on, when, having baptized a few out of the place, they met at my house at Pomfret on the Sundays, and on the weekdays I extended my labors in the South. As I was told, I found just 14 in Portland willing to obey the gospel, and by no exertion of mine could I get any more. I also obtained in the South the 22 previously spoken of, but it was a year and a half before I completed the number. Not long after receiving the office of elder, I was called to lay hands on a sister named Crowell. Actually, hold on. I want to skip this. The saints I had gathered at Portland and that met at my house were richly blessed with the various gifts of the Spirit: tongues, interpretations, prophecy, etc. I will relate one instance or two. One Sunday morning, while opening the meeting with prayer, the gift of tongues came upon me, but thinking of Paul's words that it is sometimes wisdom not to speak in tongues, unless one is present who can interpret, and forgetting that a sister possessing the gift of interpretation was present, I quenched the Spirit, and it left me. Immediately another brother broke out in tongues, the interpretation of which was that, quote, the Lord knew we were anxious to learn of the affairs of our brethren in Missouri, and that if we would humble ourselves before him and ask, he would reveal unto us the desires of our hearts. End quote. Missouri was some 1,000 miles from Portland. We accordingly bowed again in supplication before the Lord, and after rising from our knees and reseating ourselves, the same brother broke out singing in tongues in a low, mournful strain. But judge our feelings when the interpretation was given, and was found to be some 13 or 14 verses of poetry, descriptive of affairs in Missouri, the murder of our brethren there, and telling us that just at that time, quote, our brethren lay bleeding on the ground with their wives and children weeping around, end quote. So isn't this interesting? Like, you have this branch congregation who, like, at first, this like message was going to come through Benjamin Brown, through the speaking of tongues. But he was like, well, there's no one here to interpret. He later found out that there was some sister that could interpret. And so this other guy starts to speak in tongues, and it's made known that they're going to get an update on the church in Missouri. And then he starts singing in a low tone, and it turns out to be poetry, or it says some 13 or 14 verses of poetry, and they get the update. And then he says, we had so often proved the truth of similar communications that we felt as assured of the truth of this shocking news as though our eyes actually beheld the horrid sight. Our hearts were filled with sorrow. In a fortnight afterwards, we received a letter from John P. Green, a faithful elder of the church in Missouri, who was at the time he managed to write, secreted in the woods. The letter detailed and confirmed all the events previously revealed in tongues, proving that on the very day we had been informed of the transactions occurring 1,000 miles off, the bleeding corpses of our brethren lay stretched on the ground after the slaughter. It was either at or about this time that the massacre at Hans Mill took place. Isn't that crazy? So, for my other channel, I think I have 1 or 2 videos at Hans Mill, if you're interested, if you want to watch those. I also have a video in Breckenridge, which is a town, I think it's north of Hans Mill, about like 15 to 20 minutes. For some reason, they moved one of the millstones from Hans Mill to that town, and it's in the city park. But anyway, I'm going to have to add this quote to my spreadsheet for the other channel, because I'm trying to collect quotes about these church sites. And this is an interesting Hans Mill story or occurrence. You know, Hans Mill is famous. Everybody knows about Hans Mill. Well, it seems that through supernatural means, this was communicated to this branch. So interesting. When the elders Orson Hyde, he's the one that dedicated Jerusalem for the gathering of the Jews, through the proper channels and under the directions of Joseph Smith, who had the priesthood keys to authorize that. When elders Orson Hyde and Heber C. Kimball visited England on the first mission to this country, and while we were yet ignorant of their success, it was revealed in tongues at this time, it was revealed in tongues at this same branch, that just at the time we had the gift, these elders were standing with a large multitude round some waters, attending to the ordinance of baptism. Information afterwards received from England confirmed this statement in all its parts. So they got an update about basically Hans Mill and other events taking place in Missouri. The success of that first mission to England. All right, continuing. Such things as these, oft repeated, confirmed our faith. And I ask, is it wonderful possessing such evidences that the Lord was with the church, as those mentioned in the previous narrations, that neither reproach, drivings, burnings, robbings, nor even murderings should be able to quench our love for the truths which had gained us such blessings. That was a hard sentence to read. That was not a branch. There was not a branch in the whole of the church that did not possess abundance of such testimonies. And I'm just going to end it here. You know, I think these things still do happen today. I haven't heard any stories of people speaking in tongues, but we still receive these gifts of the Spirit and receive signs, manifestations, confirmations, and things like that. I tend to think that you had some of these more powerful experiences back in the early days of the church because they needed it. We just read about his and his wife's like misgivings about joining the church, and there's a lot of social pressure. Um, to them, it appeared like a small potato, figuratively speaking, and like I think it was more warranted to give more of these like really incredible experiences back then to help to help the church get going. There was so much that was being asked of them. Everything from, migrating from one place to another to, putting up money for the temple. Um, well, really not just, the Kirtland Temple, but later Nauvoo Temple and other places. There was a lot of sacrifice. And then on top of that, all the persecutions. Like those were some pretty dire circumstances. And I honor all those early pioneers in the church. If anybody needed like such powerful manifestations like this, it was them, for sure. For sure, it was them. So, yeah. Um, so I'm gonna chop this up and put some of these I'm gonna put them on these different spreadsheets according to what happened, whether it was a visitation, vision, or whether it was a miracle. So, sometime after this is published is probably when I'll have that added to the spreadsheets. But I hope you enjoyed this. I thought that this was pretty incredible, and there's still so much more out there. I know it. I mean, between all 17 of these books, even just like in this book that we're reading from, I'm sure there's just so much more. And I want to capture as much as I can. Okay, that's going to be for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.